I have been looking for an author like Paul Levy for some time. A man who can define what I've always theorized about and haven't really had the way or the wherewithal to put my finger on what it is that I'm sensing in the world. First of all, before we get ahead of ourselves, what is Wetiko? What is it really?
Sure. Okay. Well, the term, it's an indigenous term that actually is a psychospiritual disease of the soul that exists in the collective unconscious of our species. And what that means is that we all potentially have it at any moment. So it's not like, people over there have it and we don't. If we have that perspective, that's to be under its spell, because its signature is to create separation and it feeds on polarization. And so it works, its origin is in the psyche, and it works through the projective tendencies of our mind, because we're always projecting, we're always connecting the dots, but it works through our blind spot of our unconscious in such a way so that we then unwittingly become an instrument to act it out in our world, while simultaneously it hides itself from being seen. Okay? So it's actually a form of this psychic blindness that arrogantly believes not only that it's sighted, but it believes it's more sighted than anyone else. So it's to actually fall under the spell of our own mind in such a way that our, like you could say, the genius for our ability to create reality gets turned against us in a self-destructive way where we actually destroy ourselves.
It's like a collective nightmare, really, isn't it? Or are we in this collective dream or collective nightmare that we can't get out of?
Well, the thing is that the way, you see, we can't see what I'm calling the Wetiko virus when we're actually identified with the separate self. We only can begin to see it when we begin to realize that we are having a dream, that this is a mass shared dream. And to the extent that we're not awake to this Wetiko bug, whose origin is the psyche, we then guaranteed will be and are creating our worst nightmare. But what I'm pointing out in the book is that encoded in the malignancy, in the pathology, it's actually potentially showing us that we're dreaming, and it can actually help us to wake up. So that's this major thing. So it's kind of like a quantum phenomena, that it's both this pathology that's destroying our species, while simultaneously encoded in the disease is actually its own medicine that can actually help us to discover who we are.
I remember Einstein said something about how there's something called quantum entanglement, where there's spooky actions at a distance. We can look at a distance and see the spooky actions going on, and sometimes they can come and they can swallow us. And I'm thinking that what we've been seeing in the distance, or what we've been seeing in front of us, and we have perfect places to watch it on television, in the movies, elsewhere. We see the predictive program, the hyper-awareness. I mean, I've given it so many titles. There's hyper-awareness, hyper-vigilance, everything's hyper. It's like hyper-occultism. I mean, we have everything too fast, and as you say, we have these blind spots. And I always feel as though we have selective memory when it comes to history, and we forget history, we repeat history because history rhymes. And this has got to be some sort of a psychosis, a mass psychosis that has been brought on by trauma.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. The thing about Wetiko, it is a collective psychosis, and it actually has come out of this species-wide trauma. It's like our species is having PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. And the thing about trauma, which is really interesting, is that when we're in trauma, the way we try to heal from our trauma actually creates the very thing we're trying to heal from in a self-perpetuating feedback loop that doesn't have an exit strategy. And that's one way of really describing Wetiko.
Yeah, I always say it's kind of like a tweaking through time, or sometimes where we see the loop happening. I was noticing it happened with what happened in Boston. The bombs went off. We had all the trigger words come out with Islamic terror, but it was Chechenian or Chechen terror. It wasn't the typical terror we're used to. So people were kind of like wondering what to do, but there was such a confusion and obfuscation. But yet all of a sudden we have all of this, demand of hate, search and seizure, once again trampling of civil rights, civil liberties, all this happening, and everybody was like saying, okay, go ahead, let it do it. It was like Stockholm Syndrome or something. But then all of a sudden they found the landing gear of a plane near Ground Zero. Then what they did is they erected the new Freedom Tower, and then it came time to once again commemorate the death of Osama bin Laden. And it was like almost like we were reliving like this echo like a glitch in the matrix, where a bit of deja vu had to be forced on us so that we can continually feed this Wetiko you talk about. We're feeding that virus with more of the pain, more of the anger, more of the reflection on the things that we shouldn't be reflecting on. We should be reflecting on the idea of progressing or getting out of this loop. But instead, they just want us to keep going and going and going and going. It's almost as if, I was watching some commemoration, and again, I saw the plane slamming into the building, slamming into the building, slamming into the building. 18 hours, Paul. 18 hours the average American saw that happen on 9/11. And then we watch it again, and we see the bombs going off the same way, bombs going off, planes slamming in. That's got to do a number on your unconscious mind.
Sure. Well, one way of understanding that is that the mainstream media is the propaganda organ of Wetiko disease. And people who are afflicted with Wetiko and have actually fallen under its spell, they reinforce each other's unconscious madness. They feed off of and into each other's unconscious, the part of them that's mad, in a way that almost like you could think of an impenetrable bubble gets conjured up around them that resists any sort of reflection of their insanity.
Right.
And then anybody who's pointing out their insanity gets demonized. And that's where what I'm describing is the way a psychic epidemic, a collective psychosis, which is what Wetiko is, actually becomes incarnate. And that's what's happening in our world. And what's part of the collective psychosis we're in, an expression of it, is that very few people are even talking about that we're in the midst of a collective psychosis of titanic proportions. So one way to think about it, it's this virus of the mind, like a mind parasite. And a way to think about that, think about when you get a tapeworm in your system, and the tapeworm will secrete chemicals such that you start craving food that feeds the tapeworm, so that it grows bigger and it eventually kills the host, which is you. That's like Wetiko, where it's a shape-shifting bug that will assume your form. It will put you on like a suit of clothes, but also putting you on, meaning fooling you in such a way that you will then unwittingly, if you don't see the way it operates, you will identify with its thought forms. And then all of a sudden you become its instrument and you're actually its servant. And, and then it can actually possess a person so fully that they don't even know what's happening. They think they're just totally in their right mind and never feeling more themselves. And all the while they're a portal for this higher dimensional bug to be like actually incarnating its malevolent agenda in our third dimensional world.
We're living in a country right now where we are shredding the Constitution. We are destroying civil rights. We're doing all of these horrible things to ourselves, and yet we want so badly to share it with other people, and we'll do it forcefully. That is where I think that we need to stop and say, this is madness here. Yeah. Because we're not taking care of our own home, but yet we're saying, come join us. We've never had it so good. Or we're going in and saying, you're going to join us, whether you like it or not, which doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, there's when you really inquire into the deeper dynamic of that process, it's total insanity. Because in other words, we're like, killing people to bring democracy or using force to bring democracy. You see, the thing is, what's playing out in the body politic of the planet, in the world, is an actual reflection of this psychic disease that I'm calling Wetiko.
Right.
So one of the ways of seeing it is understanding, wow, there's a synchronistic correlation between what's actually playing out in the seemingly outer world and what's going on inside of our soul. And that's a description of a dream, because when you think about what is a dream is a projection of the mind. That what's happening in the dream is an actual expression of what's happening inside the dreamer. So that's what I mean when I say that encoded in this virulence of Wetiko is actually this blessing that can help us to see the dreamlike nature and actually help us to wake up. And what I'm pointing at is that, it's not just when one person sees it. When more and more of us see it, we can connect with each other and put our lucidity together and actually really make a positive difference in the world. And that's what's available to us.
We're stuck because of the fact that we're told that we have to keep on being angry. The war merchants want to make money off of our anger.
Yeah, totally. Fanning the flames of just the anger. And as long as there's an other, you see, the thing about when you see this as a dream, one of the things that means in a dream, when you wake up in that dream, you recognize that everybody is your dream character, which means they're actually embodied reflections of parts of yourself, which cuts through the separate self And all of a sudden, there is no other. And the energetic expression of that realization is compassion. And compassion is the Wetiko dissolver par excellence.
That's what I'm thinking, compassion and empathy. We don't have it anymore, really. We've lost it. And another thing, too, wouldn't Wetiko be sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy? Because for the longest time, we were all worried that we were, we were being persecuted against, hunted, looked after in someone's eyesight, whether it be the communists or the aliens or something that's going to come and get us, some boogeyman that's going to be knocking at the door. And then when the boogeyman did knock at the door and we had a face that we put up on TV all the time, we were going through that Emmanuel Goldstein type of thing, like in 1984, it just built and continued to feed that metaphoric monster. Kind of like, what was it? Little Shop of Horrors. They said, don't feed the plant because it just wants blood. Keep feeding the plant.
It's like we've created a Frankenstein monster, and the monster has developed an autonomy that's out of our control, and then it begins to eat us. So it's like our own creation is actually destroying ourselves. And so the idea that as long as there is some form of other, and we then, when there's other, there's fear. You see, in Wetiko, it feeds on the energy of fear. And that's why the powers that be, who are like actually possessed by Wetiko in a certain way, they're continually fanning the flames of fear, because then that actually keeps us under the spell of fear, and there's other and shadow projection, and then they more and more just, are assuming they're centralizing control and power. And that whole experience is a reflection of how Wetiko works inside of our mind, that it colonizes our mind.
We go now to Clyde, calling in from Texas, listening on XM 168. You're on Ground Zero with Paul Levy. Go ahead.
Hey, how you doing? It's a fascinating show you have tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm calling because the word Wetiko, I want to know what was the origin of that word, and I do believe you said it was something about the Indians, and I'm trying to figure out if they had that word, did they identify that with themselves, or did they classify them as another group of people, or did they have like a group consciousness, and in that group consciousness, that word did identify with them and their behavior?
Sure, yeah. So the word Wetiko, it's the Cree Indians, the Algonquin language, and also like maybe different tribes like the Ojibwe, they might call it Wendigo or Windigo. I'm not quite sure of the actual pronunciation, but it's all pointing at, like, in their mythology, the Wetiko or the Wendigo, they sort of visioned it as like sort of, because the winters were cold and food was scarce, that there was this sort of like this supernatural, almost like a boogeyman, like a monster that was really, kind of created in their imagination. But the point is, it was some being who was at one point a human being, but because they indulged in excess, they actually, became possessed by this spirit, this evil spirit of Wetiko. And so it was a way of symbolizing what potentially can happen to any of us when we just unrestrainably kind of indulge in our appetites or our passions. And they would typically be symbolized that the more this Wetiko monster ate, the greater its belly would sort of grow, in the sense that it would never get satiated. So it had it was insatiable. And so it was all symbolic of basically how I interpret that is that it's symbolizing an inner psychological process. And so what I've done in my book is take that sort of symbolic indigenous mythology and try to translate it into a modern idiom that's really speaking to and pointing at what's happening in current times with us.
What are y'all's ideas on what is the thing that's missing that pulls everybody together to really change the way that these things are happening? Because I'm really fascinated by everything that y'all are saying, and I would love to hear y'all, both of y'all.
Let him answer the question. Go ahead.
Yeah, sure. Okay. Well, one thing is that the thing about prayer is that even in the Bible, I think doesn't Christ say, "Whatever you pray for, believe you already have it, and it shall be yours." The idea being that if we're praying for something like in the future and we're thinking we're lacking it and we're hoping we're going to have it in the future, we're subtly suggesting to our subconscious our lack in the present moment. So it actually then is creating the very opposite of what we're wanting. And then the other thing about prayer is that if we can actually step out of our ego, the narcissistic self, and actually pray for what's best for the whole, So then we become a channel for like whatever can serve the whole, which is really serving ultimately ourselves, but that's to really be serving God. That's when we connect with that deeper power in us that's connected with God inside of us.
Very, very amazing that this is what we're talking about tonight. It's a solution to a lot of things. Paul Levy's book is called Dispelling Wetiko, Breaking the Curse of Evil. You can go to awakeninthedream.com, awakeninthedream.com. More Ground Zero. Don't go away. So you have Paul Levy on the program tonight talking about the Wetiko. I have somehow, throughout my studies have also come to some conclusions about how there is this evil that feeds upon itself and that we don't know how to keep it down. I think the best way to do so is to remember that we do have the ability to have compassion and empathy for others. And we need to learn to have this, because it just seems to me that if there was ever evidence for an alien threat, whether you call it a demonic, alien, satanic conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, Freeman called it a satanic conspiracy, whatever you want to call it, we have something that has us in its grip, and we need to find a way to stop feeding it. And I think that the more we learn about it and the more we talk about it openly and we call it out, the better we'll be in the long run. And we'll realize that we do have a future and that we can plan for a very, very good future. I'm Clyde Lewis, and this is Ground Zero Behind the Scenes.